How Microsoft is approaching enterprise technology, the Microsoft study about jobs being at most risk from AI, and Metcash's ERP failure. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 238 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 238, the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital strategy, people, process, and technology. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. So, Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So exciting episode today, even though this is a tech agnostic podcast series. Today's episode will be focused on Microsoft. We're going to dive into the Microsoft ecosystem and really understand how Microsoft is approaching enterprise technology and AI and Power Apps and all the different solutions that they're providing to the enterprise tech space today. We're going to start off with some opening social media questions. We'll get into some newsworthy topics around how Microsoft study flags jobs most at risk from AI. So we'll learn about what Microsoft has to say about AI's impact on potential job loss. And then we'll also talk about how Microsoft is debuting its one of its first in-house tools. So we'll get into that here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll have Mason Whitaker, the CEO of Volt Technologies, on the show. He's going to be on talking about how Microsoft is approaching the enterprise tech space. We really want to use this as an opportunity to dive into the sometimes confusing nature of Microsoft's ecosystem to understand how to find the right product within the Microsoft ecosystem or the right products, how to find the right partners, and just really understanding how Microsoft is creating these tools for the enterprise tech space and how they may or may not fit what it is you're looking for. So stay tuned for that deep dive conversation. That'll be a great one with Mason here in a few minutes. And then later in the show, we'll get into a Microsoft D365 case study. So we'll talk about an ERP failure at Metcash, which is an Australian-based retailer that recently had a highly publicized Microsoft D365 failure. So before we get to all that, though, what sort of social media questions do we have in store to discuss here today, Darian?
Yeah, some good questions. This first one is pretty straight up. It's just asking, is project leader the same as a project sponsor? And if they're not the same, what's the difference?
Yeah, good question. So project leader versus project sponsor. Typically, those are two different roles for most organizations. And a smaller one, I suppose you could maybe combine the two. But generally speaking, the project sponsor is more focused on providing that executive leadership and guidance to the overall team and making sure that the overall executive team is involved in decision-making where it needs to be. Any sorts of questions around or risks or issues around scope, budget, certainly impact to the operations and making those decisions around what our future state is going to look like. A lot of times that's the role of the project sponsor, but then the project leader, which you might interchange with the word project manager, is a little bit more on the execution side. So not just the execution from a pure PM technical perspective, but also from a leadership and guidance perspective too. And typically the project leader and project sponsor need to work very closely hand in hand to ensure that they're on the same page and in sync, and the execution is matching what the vision of the overall project sponsor and the executive team might be. So it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. One's more at the executive level, more the strategic guidance, whereas the project leader, the other role, is more at the execution, leadership and execution.
Got it. This next question kind of plays more into Microsoft, which I know we'll be talking about a lot this episode, but it's, in your experience, Eric, what are the most common missteps clients make when customizing Business Central too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I'd say the mistake itself is to customize Business Central too much. So that is one of the sort of the root causes. But actually, oftentimes the root cause is that you have the flexibility in the tool set to be able to customize, which is a good thing and a bad thing at times. And we get a lot of clients that are deploying Microsoft tools and they end up customizing things they shouldn't be customizing just because they can. They have tools that make it easier. So that's great. That's flexible, but sometimes that flexibility can come back to bite you, because if your organization is resisting change or you're not leveraging the out of the box capabilities, Microsoft almost makes it too easy to customize. Whereas if you're implementing like an SAP, the good thing about SAP, it's good and bad. The good thing with SAP is you don't have as much flexibility. It's more focused on standard processes, whereas Microsoft is more focused on creating more flexible processes. So I think that's the first thing, is recognize that too much customization can lead to risk, higher cost, higher maintenance issue, longer term maintenance issues if you're changing the source of the software. That's the first thing. And then second thing is just knowing that you may have to customize some things, but it doesn't mean you need to customize everything. And you should be very selective about what you do and don't customize. So that'd be some of the advice I'd give to anyone going through a D365 or any sort of Microsoft or non-Microsoft ERP implementation. You want to make sure you have the right project governance in place. And back to your question a moment ago about project leadership and project sponsorship, making sure that you have strong leadership to know the difference between where you may want to customize the software and where you may want to push back and say, no, we're going to power through this without changing the way the software works.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And to get into our first newsworthy article of the day, we're going to talk about Microsoft and one of the recent studies they did about AI. AI is obviously something we're always talking about on here, but I think one of the things people fear the most with AI is how it's going to disrupt their job, or if it's going to take over their job. So the two big takeaways from this newsworthy article was there's some high risk roles and some low risk roles. The high risk roles they found were occupations heavy in text, data, and repetitive knowledge tasks like interpreters, translators, historians, journalists, web developers, mathematicians, and financial advisors. These all scored the highest on Microsoft's AI scale, meaning generative AI can automate much of their day-to-day work. The lower risk roles were jobs requiring physical presence, so manual skills or human empathy, like nurses, construction workers, and cleaners. They all remain relatively safe. AI can't easily replicate hands-on care or physical labor, at least not yet, is what they're saying. One surprise on the high-risk list was data scientists. Despite being a sought-after profession, the report suggests many tasks in data science, including analysis, summarization, and visualization, are highly automatable. Historians, meanwhile, are pushing back. While AI can search archives, it still lacks the interpretive and contextual thinking real scholarship demand. A bottom line from this article was Microsoft is signaling even the safe white-collar roles aren't immune. The workforce divide is less blue-collar versus white-collar and more automatable versus non-automatable. Questions for you, Eric. What does this mean as far as data scientists showing up in high risk? Is that surprising? Do you agree AI could even undercut AI experts themselves?
That's really interesting. I suppose anything's possible. I didn't expect to see that on the list, or I didn't expect to hear that study result. I'd say if that is true, it's probably a ways off, because you need the data scientists to help figure out how in the world AI is going to get better. And I don't think it gets better without data scientists and people that really understand the guts and the heart of the technology. I don't know. I have trouble seeing it, to be honest. I have a feeling that one may not materialize, because even though, yeah, okay, if you're coding or something like that, you can use AI for that, but you still need someone to manage and to improve AI and to put the right parameters in place. You think of how imperfect AI is today. There's a long way to go before it gets to the point where it's truly perfected itself. And even once it has, you have to wonder if is it just a continuous improvement journey for these AI models, in which case data scientists are going to continue to be in high demand, or do they work themselves out of a job? I think it's probably the former, not the latter, but that's just my own opinion. I'd love to hear the audience take on that, though.
For sure, me too. And for businesses specifically, Eric, what is a smarter strategy that you recommend? Do you recommend to retrain existing talent to use that AI, or do you restructure teams entirely or find people that are already trained in AI? What is the best approach here for businesses?
Well, with where we are right now, where we stand right now here in the middle of 2025, I think it's not realistic to find people that know AI well at scale. I mean, you might find some pockets here and there, but the reality is most of the world doesn't really understand AI, and they're learning. We're all sort of learning it together in many cases, with the exception, of course, for the technologists and the people that are involved in developing the software. But for the average end user, the average employee, we're all kind of in the same boat in many cases. So I think the key is to provide upskilling internally. If you can do that yourself, or have a more formal training program that you use third-party providers to train on AI, building that internal competency and building your team and giving them a career path that embraces AI rather than creates a fear of it. I think that's going to create potentially a sustainable competitive advantage for companies that move on this quickly with their upskilling of their team.
For sure. And lastly, do you think or do you see this accelerating the skills gap between industries that embrace AI and those that more resist it?
Yeah, that's, we had a podcast guest on here, I think it was sometime last year, who mentioned that there was a study that shows that there's going to become a greater divide between people that use AI and those that don't. And a greater divide in terms of you're going to have higher EQs, higher IQ workers or workforce, because you're going to have an higher IQ in these AI-driven work roles. And it's also that income disparity will kick in as well. And that's according to a podcast guest named Walker Reynolds, who's on the show. I believe it was him that talked about it last year, where he was saying that average IQ, the average worker, is going to have to increase. And then the pay gap between the highly paid people and the lower paid people is going to continue to accelerate. So that's why I think there's so many people right now raising the red flag, saying, hey, this is going to potentially create some societal blowback or ripple effect that is unintended. And that's why, I'd be curious to see, how governments react to that, because I think that's when governments will have to step in to try and equalize or normalize the playing field or whatever. And that's where innovation sometimes can suffer and whatnot. And we've talked about that on this podcast before as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of all this AI with Microsoft, in our next newsworthy article, actually, Microsoft is talking about their first in-house AI models, and they have officially launched them. So their models are MAI Voice 1 and MAI 1 Preview, and they're making this major strategic shift towards less dependence on its longtime partner, OpenAI. So two major highlights with this. MAI Voice 1 is a lightning fast speech generation model that can produce up to 1 minute of audio in under 1 second using single GPU. It's already embedded into Copilot Daily and Copilot Podcast feature, allowing rapid narration of news stories and even real-time podcast-style discussions. The second is MAI 1 Preview, a large language foundation model trained on approximately 15,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs, designed for everyday user queries and instruction following. It's currently undergoing public testing on LMA Arena, or Lamrina, I think, with plans to integrate into Copilot into the upcoming weeks. Strategic repositioning with this, Microsoft is signaling a pivot towards self-reliance in AI development, reducing reliance on costly and slower OpenAI models. Also, the company intends to build a diversified portfolio, a suite of specialized AI models tailored towards different users' intents and experiences. So, Eric, with all of this, what does Microsoft launching its own speech and text AI models mean for its long-standing relationship with OpenAI, in your opinion?
Well, I think Microsoft is in a pretty unique position in the AI arms race just because of their affiliation with OpenAI and their early involvement with OpenAI and ChatGPT. And I think also, they have a unique advantage over other big enterprise tech providers in that companies are using not only potentially a Microsoft ERP system like Dynamics 365, but they're also using other Microsoft applications that are capturing data, whether it's through Microsoft Office or Power Apps or Copilot, obviously. So Microsoft has all these different tools where users are engaging and transacting information and data and knowledge. And I think Microsoft is in a unique position to capitalize on that. What that means to the relationship with OpenAI, that's another story. I'm not sure. I think they can coexist, the relationship with OpenAI and the whole pursuit of Copilot and more the enterprise tech strategy. I think those can both go hand in hand and coexist. But it would be curious. I'd be interested to discuss that a little bit more detail with Mason Whitaker, who's going to be on the show here in just a few minutes to talk about the Microsoft ecosystem. He might have a better insight into that. We can cover that with him as well.
For sure. And on MAI Voice One, that specific AI they launched, speed on a signal GPU is impressive. But how might this translate into real world efficiency gains? Like, what will businesses get out of this?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'd be curious to hear from Microsoft or someone involved or that's used it, what some of the use cases are. I would imagine that there's some, just speech recognition type of benefit of being able to share some of the tribal knowledge in people's heads and use that to capture that information, and then obviously to feed into other AI models as a source of not only analysis and data, but also just to capture and centralize the tribal knowledge of the organization. So I can see a huge amount of value. I'm not seeing exactly how organizations would start to use that now, especially if like a lot of our clients are so far away from getting to that point of being able to think about something like that, because they're still trying to figure out, they're still back 10 to 20 years ago trying to figure out how to automate some of their core business processes, some of their basic business processes, and they aren't anywhere close to thinking about these truly groundbreaking, innovative processes. Some of our clients are, but some of them aren't. So I think a lot of it just depends on where you are in the whole journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question with this: as Microsoft builds a family of in-house models, what opportunities or challenges does this create for AI developers and partners?
Well, I think it probably creates more opportunities for partners. I mean, and for Microsoft themselves. I mean, I think by having these mass amounts of data, it gives them a leg up and a competitive advantage, especially if you can incorporate all that end user data that right now is getting lost outside of an ERP system or outside of any formalized ERP or formalized enterprise tech stack. You think of all the knowledge and all the information that gets shared outside of a core company system, and there's a ton of it. I would argue it's probably a lot more that's not in any central system than there is that's actually in it. So if you can build these tools to capture more of that tribal knowledge and more of those pockets of information and data throughout an organization, I think that just creates a lot of opportunity for Microsoft, but also for its partners to do something with it, either to create a solution or to take a variation of Microsoft D365 and create a specific use or a new use for that tool or other Microsoft tools. So I think it creates a lot more opportunity than threat, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those were some good topics today, but I'm sure we're going to dive a lot deeper into Microsoft and everything to do with Microsoft today in our conversation with the guest today.
Yes, our guest will be Mason Whitaker. He's going to be on to talk about the Microsoft enterprise tech ecosystem and how this all ties together between D365 F&O and Business Central, and even some of the legacy Microsoft products like Great Plains and Solomon and Exapta, et cetera, et cetera. Lot to talk about. So how does Microsoft approach the enterprise tech space? We'll have Mason Whitaker, who's the CEO of Volt Technologies. He'll be on the show here in just a minute. And then later in the show, we'll get into a deep dive case study of a failed Microsoft D365 ERP implementation with a company called Metcash out of Australia. So we'll dive into that. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following. on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
With 1,000 eyes and a good disguise, hit 'em right between the eyes, hit 'em right between the eyes. We knew I'd go.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 238. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital transformation journeys. And we are also affiliated with Major Tom Productions. So Major Tom Productions produces this show. If you'd like to collaborate on future content that we produce, feel free to reach out to the contact information that we've listed below. So I'm excited for our next guest. We're talking a lot about the Microsoft enterprise tech ecosystem here today. It's one that we haven't really unpacked in a ton of detail in this podcast before. We've done it with SAP, we've done it with Oracle NetSuite and some of the other systems in the marketplace, but we haven't really taken the time to dive deep into the Microsoft ecosystem, even beyond Microsoft D365. We have talked about D365, which is the core flagship ERP system for Microsoft. We have talked about that quite a bit on this podcast in passing, on and off, different case studies and guests that have had experience with it, but we haven't taken the time to really dive into what the overall overarching strategy for Microsoft is and how all their different tools fit together within the enterprise tech space and what they're doing now and in the future going forward. So what we thought we'd do is have one of the leading partners and thought leaders in the Microsoft space here on the show, Mason Whitaker. We thought we'd have him here to talk about the Microsoft ecosystem. And by the way, if you're interested in Microsoft D365 and you're trying to figure out how to manage your Microsoft D365 implementation, you will also want to check out our guide to successful Microsoft D365 implementations. And I'll include a QR code right here on the screen and a link below. But be sure to download that as sort of a complimentary or supplementary piece of information that will help you along with this conversation. So with that all being said, I'd like to welcome Mason Whitaker to the show. Mason, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Eric, for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you and I discovered each other on TikTok, if you can believe that.
Right.
Especially for me being an old guy. I mean, first of all, you have to ask, why was I on TikTok? But second of all, just kind of a small world that we both ran into each other, and we've been exchanging notes, trying to make this happen now for a few months. We finally made it happen. So it's good to meet you on TikTok, and now direct here in a podcast format.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. All business TikTok. That's what we're about.
Yes, all business. Yeah, we're not messing around with the dances and all the trending stuff for sure. But you put some really good content out there on TikTok related to Microsoft and just really good little tidbits of advice for people that are either in the Microsoft ecosystem or considering being part of the Microsoft ecosystem. But before we get into all that stuff here, tell us a little bit about Volt Technologies, your journey to why you started Volt Technologies. Sort of give us that fly of yourself and your company.
Yeah, of course. My background is heavily on the technical side. So I spent a long time as a front-end engineer doing, JavaScript and building websites. Actually, that's when I started my first company, was as a web engineer doing web design. Kind of really got deeper into the programming space and then found Microsoft, kind of stumbled into the business applications ecosystem, was a technical architect doing AX deployments for a long time. So about 4 years really on the AX side of things, and then started getting into project management and program management, and with that transformation into D365 finance and operations, started to take more larger global implementations on with our parent company, Sunrise Technologies. And I'll explain a little bit of the relationship there as well. But in that role, I was doing very global rollouts as a program manager and saw a lot of differences when it comes to implementing globally. So different localizations and different ways you had to structure teams, and just really a massive large scale rollout. So one of the projects I was running, we had 172 countries that we had to deploy. So in ERP, that's 172 companies. And we got to the point where we were doing 5 to 6 go lives a weekend, because we had templatized and really built out a framework for how we brought the dynamics to the customer. And this was retail, manufacturing, distribution. So it was a lot of complexity and a lot of localizations, but we were still rolling these out very quickly. We'd start and we'd go live after 6 weeks with a country. And doing that with F&O is pretty crazy fast. And so I started thinking, if we can do this for a massive company and very large scale, why can't we do this for small and mid-size, more mom and pop? And that was what, as a web engineer and other companies I had kind of started in the past, it was always SMB. So that's where I always really wanted to go and not be in the very large scale enterprise. And what I found was that it was the product. So I had always been in AX and finance and operations, and that product is made for enterprise. And at that same time was really when Microsoft was releasing Dynamics Business Central to the market. So kind of all of that, the stars aligned. Started working with the CEO at Sunrise, who's my business partner now in Volt Technologies, John Pence. And we said, let's do this together. Let's come up with a way to deliver Business Central to the market, to the SMB market. So we created Volt Technologies as a joint venture to deliver Business Central to the SMB market. So I've been doing that ever since. So really since the product got launched at Microsoft, seen a lot of success, a lot of adoption of Business Central in the ecosystem. But very familiar with the entire ecosystem of Microsoft products. So from Dynamics, the whole entire business application suite, and the Power Platform, so more the enhanced productivity suite, but then also all the M365 and just general productivity tools. So excited for everything we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were affiliated with or had that joint venture with Sunrise. So that's super
Yeah.
helpful to know. And for those that don't know, Sunrise is a pretty significant player in the F&O, the Dynamics 365 F&O space, especially for larger organizations. We've come across Sunrise and worked with Sunrise on several larger scale D365 implementations. But looking at the overall ecosystem, you just started to touch on this, and we might as well just sort of dive into it here. When I think of Microsoft, like 10 years ago, when I thought of how Microsoft was approaching the enterprise tech space, if I'm being fully candid, I thought it was pretty fragmented, a little all over the place. They just had all these different options with Business Central and D365 F&O, like you just mentioned. You had Power BI, Power Apps. You had all these different ISVs and partners that were taking D365 and tailoring it for certain industries. And there's a ton of different VARs. I mean, it's probably got I think it's probably has the largest VAR ecosystem of any of the vendors. Just there's so many different VARs out there. It almost creates, in some ways you could look at that and say, well, that just sounds like a mess. That's just a lot of stuff to navigate. But, now in today's day and age, the way ERP is evolving into much less of a one size fits all, one answer for everyone sort of approach. Now I'm starting to think maybe there's a brilliant strategy all along, and it just took some time for it to really align and sync up with the market. But what do you how would you describe, just at a high level, how would you describe how Microsoft approaches the enterprise tech space in general?
Yeah, it's completely partner led, really. When it comes to business applications and just implementation, you're not going to find a Microsoft consultant that's going to do this for you. Whereas, a lot of the other business applications vendors out there, they're going to have at least a portion that they're doing implementation or even continuous improvement and support themselves. But Microsoft really leaves that all up to the partner. There's a lot of enablement by Microsoft, with resources on their own side and support that they can give partners directly. But it's entirely partner-led. And that's especially the case in small and mid-sized business. So in enterprise, you have a lot more support and concierge and things like that. But really in SMB, you have to find a good VAR who's going to assist you with business applications, or else you're kind of just left with just the products themselves. So it's entirely a partner-led motion, which has led to, like you're saying, a proliferation of a lot of partners that are out there. Definitely the largest of the ecosystem, just with business applications, and the largest of ISVs. There's Microsoft AppSource is their marketplace for apps and offerings. And in the places where it is 100% partner-led, like Business Central and SMB, there are tens of thousands of these apps that are out there that are built on as bolt-ons or ISVs to the solution. So very much partner-led, and it's tough to navigate. But over time, Microsoft has gotten better at saying, hey, these are the system integrators that you should be working with if you're in this specific industry or if you're in this country, and starting to get better at almost like surfacing up partners to customers that are going to make sense for them. And that industry specific is a big key to that.
Right. And I'd love to hear from the audience too, just your experience with the Microsoft different channels in the ecosystem overall. What kind of apps have you touched or been involved with in the Microsoft space? If you have, I'd love to hear your feedback in the chat. Let's talk a bit about Dynamics though. You talked about AX and how you started off in the AX space. And for those that don't know, that's Exapta was the name of the software. And historically, before D365, you had Microsoft Dynamics AX, which is Exapta. You had Great GP, which is Great Plains, and then you had Nav, which is Navision. And now you've got primarily D365, Business Central, and F&O. Can you just talk about just the ERP space and sort of how Microsoft evolved from acquiring and owning those three legacy products, and then how that evolved into the D365 strategy of today?
Yeah, of course. And it's honestly a very interesting story where you didn't think that maybe they were making some of the right decisions early in maybe the early 2000s with just having acquired so many different ERPs and they were competing against one another. But over time, it really has made sense. So Microsoft, like you said, had Exapta that they acquired in the early 2000s. They also had Great Plains. Solomon was another one as well, kind of focused on project management, SL. and then Nav, so Navision. So they had all these different ERP offerings. Each one had different things that they really focused on, like SL for projects, Nav for more inventory with SMB, GP for financials, and AX was kind of always the bigger, more enterprise solution. And over time, they continued to upgrade these, like into 2010, 2014, kind of into there. But then they started to recognize, hey, we have a need to consolidate and really create a clear business application strategy. So what they did is they took Great Plains, Solomon, and Navision and said, we're going to take the Navision code base and we're going to take all the features that we can from GP and SL and build those into the Navision code base, and then upgrade that into a cloud-first solution, which is now Business Central. And they made that specifically for small and mid-sized businesses, because people who are running on Nav and SL were predominantly SMB. GP kind of played a line between both, but they really made it specifically for small and mid-size. AX, they continued to upgrade and add a lot more supply chain capabilities or in-depth, planning, optimization capabilities, and then created that as Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. So the only two offerings that they have today are D365 Business Central and D365 Finance and Supply Chain. So that's the way they split them out. Is Business Central is for small and mid-sized businesses, and Finance and Supply Chain is for enterprise. And there's even more complexity around licensing and what the products are inside of Finance and Supply Chain, that you can break out. But that's kind of the general basis of it.
So what if I'm a mid-market company? I'm right in the middle. I'm sort of, I'm maybe on the larger side for Business Central, but I'm not quite big enough yet to consume all of what F&O has to offer. What are some of the big differentiators between the two products for those that might, fall into either option?
Yeah, the biggest thing comes down to enterprise capabilities. So we used to say before, when doing evaluation like fit gap on BC versus Finance and Supply Chain, we used to say transaction volumes and revenue. That was typically good drivers. But Microsoft has come out with a lot on the Business Central side that allows you to have really no ceiling when it comes to transactions. So now it's strictly on fit gap of capabilities. And the capabilities differences with AX, now Finance and Supply Chain, when they brought it to the cloud, they made a decision that they were going to keep further investing into these tier one capabilities that are similar to what you see in SAP. So like a tier one compete. So these are things like, advanced multi-region planning and distributed order management, where you have an order from one country, and in order to fulfill that order, you've got to route it through several distribution centers and even retail stores, to get there. And that's a problem that small and mid-sized businesses don't really run into, because they're normally operating just a couple warehouses or maybe a couple dozen retail stores, and they're not having that complexity, like I was saying in the beginning, of the company that has 172 legal entities. So that's really where Microsoft said, we're going to further invest into these tier one capabilities and just really continue to bolster the product. On the flip side of that, with Business Central, they made a commitment to saying, we're going to try to create the most usable, the most reliable, the most available ERP on the market and make it seamless within the Microsoft ecosystem. So they release updates every 6 weeks, and they've done really exactly that. They've focused on making it more usable, making it available in more countries, making it available in more languages, making it more integrated in AI with their Copilot offerings. And they've really focused on that aspect to it. So you can see as over time, since kind of that initial release of BC in 2018, how the two have kind of like diverged, where F&O has gone towards that SAP large scale compete. And then Business Central has, really focused on just becoming a better and better, more usable SMB product. So it's exciting to see where we're at now. About 7 years later, and that is exactly the truth. That's where they're at. BC is the fastest growing, most usable, seamless, reliable ERP on the market. And then F&O, Finance and Supply Chain, is now that really robust tier one SAP compete offering. So that's kind of how they actually branched off.
So that's super interesting. Thank you for that overview, because I know we have a lot of mid-sized clients, mid-market, where they can't really decide between the two. They feel like they could, either one could probably work and have different strengths. when you look at Volt, because you guys at Volt Technologies are more focused on Business Central, what are the common platforms that people are considering alongside Business Central? Is it like NetSuite or Vue or like who are they?
Yeah, we consider it tier 1 and tier 2. And then you have like tier 3 with QuickBooks and FreshBooks and things like that. But normally you're thinking tier 1 and tier 2. In tier 2, what we consider is, like Acumatica, NetSuite, Business Central, sometimes SAP Business One, but not too much of that going on, at least as of lately. And then industry specific solutions. That's definitely a lot of what we see. Not that they don't have the tier 1, but they do have those industry capabilities, but they don't have the platform maybe. And then the tier 1, that's the Oracle Fusion, like Oracle Cloud, SAP, finance and supply chain, some flavors of Infor, that sort of thing.
Okay, interesting. So on the ISV front, you were talking about how ISVs go into the app space and create these different either bolt-ons or variations of D365 that can fit a certain industry, or it's a little bit more specific to an industry. Is that true just for F&O, or is in the Business Central space, is there the same sort of strategy on the small and mid market? Yeah,
that's a great call out. There's actually way more in Business Central. So because BC has more gaps, there are less capabilities than finance and supply chain just inherently with the strategy. And the way that Microsoft wants to enable those gaps to be filled in the SMB space is to get ISVs on board. So when you go to AppSource, the most amount of apps that exist on there are for Business Central. So there are a lot of ISV players, and that's definitely what we see for implementation. With a mid-market company, let's say you're 150 million in revenue, and you're like, I don't know if I could be BC, I could be F&O. What you'll see is that if you just take a standard company, is that you'll have Business Central and then maybe a couple ISVs or a few ISVs. And then if you do F&O instead, you maybe only have one ISV or two ISVs. So there's always more ISVs as you kind of scale up and you're looking for those enterprise capabilities, but maybe you don't want to buy the full package. You can do that with getting ISVs. So that definitely is a strategy that we see a lot in the mid-market.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting how Microsoft was one of the early pioneers of just creating more of almost a platform, than others.
Yeah. And it's really baked into Business Central. So that's similar with like, if you go to Shopify and you're building a Shopify site and you run into like a capability that you're missing, like loyalty tracking or something like that. You can go to the app market and you can install it immediately and the capabilities are available for you. So Business Central is built that same way too, where inside of Business Central, you can look at the marketplace and you can hit install and the capabilities are there for you. So it's got that flexibility with ISVs, which is why a lot of ISVs are kind of gravitating towards that ease of use and ease of installation.
Right. Now here's a question from Sanjay on LinkedIn that's an interesting one. Sanjay says, it's a two-part question. I'll focus on the first part here, which is how does Microsoft see the innovation of integrating with transactions with bigger ERPs like SAP and Oracle? Does Microsoft have sort of a two-tier strategy to address maybe companies that have a bigger, more complex ERP system on the back end, but then providing more maybe industry-specific or functional-specific capabilities on top of that? Or is it more, are they taking more of a standalone, let's go full Microsoft or nothing? What's their approach there?
Yeah, when it comes to the ability to handle higher transaction volumes, like what an SAP does, F&O is built for that. Like finance and supply chain is built in such a way, like I was saying, the customer that I had with almost 200 different companies, global 24/7 shop, hundreds of retail stores and distribution centers, things like that. You have to be able to handle a lot of compute with that. This is one of the biggest Microsoft implementations ever performed, especially of commerce. And the way that it was handled was Microsoft has a team internally called the Fast Track team. And this team is able to help you understand the compute requirements that you're going to need and the amount of AOSs or application object servers that you're going to require. And they'll actually, maintain that for you. So you'll have your own servers that are dedicated in the data center, and be able to have a lot more hands-on management to those things when you start getting into those, more tier one large scale compute requirements. When you look at Business Central, it's built actually as an elastic pool where Microsoft is using telemetry to look at how much compute you're leveraging at any given time, and it's scaling up and down essentially your containers or your server, basically the amount of workload you can use, and it's dynamically doing that. That change that they made to have this elastic pool, it removed that ceiling that there was before, where hey, if you have 1 million transactions a month or something, there's zero chance you can run on Business Central. That's not the case anymore, because now it will scale up and scale down kind of automatically, which allows Microsoft to be flexible with that space. So definitely in the tier one side, there's a whole strategy around setting up from just an infrastructure standpoint, how to handle those very large transaction workloads. And you have to work with a partner who's like got that status with Microsoft as well to get fast track architects in there to set all this up. And then on the VC side, it's handled for you with that elastic pool. For the capabilities wise, there's not stuff that Microsoft does go and necessarily offer that isn't already included within the finance and supply chain package. Like you do have a lot of additional things that are like SAP like features, with separate planning engines, like planning optimization and things like that really perform just like those SAP modules do.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, one other thing I'll mention too is if you're already a Microsoft shop and you haven't chosen your tier one solution yet, you have to look at, well, if I'm already a Microsoft shop, it's going to be a lighter lift to go to a F&O. And in terms of user adoption and just the learning curve, I would imagine is going to be a little bit more favorable to F&O and D365 overall, not to mention that the platform is a bit more open than like an SAP would be. So I think that flexibility is something you've got to look at too. It's a blessing and a curse. We see some clients get into trouble because Microsoft's so flexible. It's almost like you need to close off their options at times because they end up kind of going down some tangents that they don't need to go down.
Especially with Business Central, I will say Business Central is very flexible and open. It's similar with like an Odoo where you can customize and it's really configurable for you, but that can be a disadvantage at times if you go too detail into that. So important to work with a partner, and actually look at, should I do this? Just because it can doesn't mean necessarily that you should.
Right. Yeah, it's a good line. It's one of my favorite lines. Just because you can customize it doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, 100%.
What about, here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn that getting into Copilot and AI. So Darian says, you noted 6-week release cycles and rapid Copilot integration. Do you feel customers are actually using these AI features in Copilot in daily operations yet, or is it more of a potential value story in sales demos? Like, did you have examples where clients viewers are actually starting to use Copilot either in the implementation and or post-implementation in production as part of their business processes?
Yeah, definitely most are post-production. We want to make sure that you're getting that data and the security level right and just like a business process right. So we're not seeing, during implementation as much. I mean, we're definitely starting to see more of it, but the actual AI scenarios and letting that do normal business process, we're seeing a lot of it post-production. So in what we call our continuous improvement motion, we have a lot of customers that are either actively going through or have already gone live with these AI implementations and Copilot offerings. And we're seeing real value. I mean, it's kind of amazing to see, when you actually focus on doing this transformation with AI and doing it the right way, this methodology that we've built, you're seeing like 4 hours a day of what someone's doing, just manually reconciling invoices and checks. And they can do it in 5 minutes with Copilot. And they're like, I can actually get time back to start doing the things I've been wanting to do. Like, it's really awesome to see. We're seeing a lot of that, I will say. It's a lot of post-production deployment, like phase 2 and more those fast cycles, which with AI, I mean, you can get so much time to value out of it. You can really spend, the time shadowing and understanding what the core requirements are, and like maybe what has to be done by a person, so that human in the loop, and then just spending the time solutioning and saying, well, what can AI actually do from this process? What percentage of this process can be performed, by Copilot or a Copilot Studio agent? And then going back and just quickly building and iterating on a solution. And we've seen in like 15 minutes a solution come that saves, months of time a year for companies. So it's really exciting. We definitely are seeing it a lot more. And this is we're definitely thinking it's going to be a huge portion of our strategy going into 2026.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Microsoft is that, with all the hype around AI, all the software vendors, SAP, Oracle, obviously Microsoft, but Infor, Epicor, NetSuite, all these guys are investing very heavily in AI and hyping and touting AI. But what's really unique about Microsoft is the head start it has in the whole AI space. I mean, I feel like there's a distinct advantage that Microsoft has because of the not only the Copilot tool, but the affiliation with OpenAI. And
Yep.
I just feel like that. How do you think that affects the overall enterprise tech strategy in AI in particular?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we see of why Microsoft's winning in this AI race is the platform, because you're already using these tools from a productivity standpoint. And then if you're using it from an ERP and CRM standpoint, great. But having that data and the security model figured out, that gives you such a leg up on being able to implement these tools like Copilot, where we see a lot of companies where they come to us and they say they want AI. And we're like, okay, well, let's start looking at the data and we'll look at the systems model. And we're like, well, you don't even have like a true ERP yet. Or this thing is an AS400 that doesn't have API capabilities. You're not going to be able to leverage really AI unless you start to like modernize that stack. And so for those that are already in that Microsoft ecosystem, enabling these new tools is very, very fast. And so they do have a clear advantage because of that, because they're able to just kind of enable a lot of these tools. And then they can see how to actually implement them, because they're getting a lot of that like reinforcement, that iterative loop learning and feedback through Copilot. So it's been exciting to see. The platform play is definitely the right decision. I've been thinking it for a while, but now with AI, it's just exponential.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see where not only where the whole enterprise tech space is going, but Microsoft and the way they're navigating is really interesting. What about power apps? Let's talk about that. You mentioned that a couple times now. The power apps. Wait, tell us for the layman that doesn't know what power apps is. Maybe could you start by just giving us a brief overview of what it is, and then maybe talk about how it fits into the overall enterprise tech stack that Microsoft offers?
Yeah, so Power Apps is a tooling inside of the Power Platform, which essentially is Microsoft's enhanced productivity suite. So you get access to a bunch of tools like Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, was Power Virtual Agents, now Copilot. And Power Apps is really the low/no code offering that Microsoft has for deployment of user experience or user interfaces. And it's got all of these connections through their connectors. So like anything from Salesforce, Jira, Excel, your ERP and Dynamics, or any CRM. And you can build drag and drop interfaces to perform certain actions or tasks that before you'd have to go and pull up an index.html file and manually build out all of your web app and then connect it in. It would take a long time. I think when I first experienced Power Apps was, I think about 7 years ago, and 7 or 8 years ago. And it blew my mind, just being a front-end engineer and having to spend all that time, decades ago now, but like where I'd manually go through, set up an index.html, add the CSS, add the JavaScript, just to get one little like input box that you could click a button and perform a task. Now with Power Apps, it's seamless, not from just the UI drag and drop, but also the connectivity because of all of their Power Platform connectors that they have. So if you want to work across lots of different data sources and have actions performed, Power Apps is just a really easy way to get quick time to value.
Right, that makes total sense. Now, what about this is a little bit total change of pace here on this question, but this is an interesting one from the audience. This is from Perry on LinkedIn. Perry says, I used to implement Great Plains accounting before Microsoft bought them and other systems as well. If I want to get back into the small and mid-market, government agencies and mid-market, where do I start? So do you have any career advice for someone who wants to maybe become more of a Business Central focused consultant, some more focus on the small and mid-market?
Yeah, there's some really great documentation out there that Microsoft has on the differences between Great Plains and Business Central, because that is the natural upgrade path. So if you were on Great Plains or you had implemented Great Plains before working in accounting or SMB, then you can go and look and see, all right, what are the terminology differences, and how can I, start to take my knowledge from GP and then map that into Business Central. And there's a lot of things that are really familiar to you. So it's a lot of the same concepts. There's some different terms that are different, like segments in GP or now dimensions in BC. You're going to find things like that. But definitely the natural way is to start looking at the Microsoft docs around that GP to BC conversion. Great Plains is end of life was announced. I think there's 2026 is like the first cutoff, and then there's a couple more leading up until the full wipe, which is 2029. And so now's the time to start looking into Business Central, because there won't be, that Great Plains, at least support coverage or things like that going into the later part of the decade.
Yeah. Very cool. So here's a question from Michael on LinkedIn. Michael says, Microsoft is the company and customer and device digital surface. So anything that touches it or with multimodal observed by it connects to Microsoft. Does that ring a bell with you, or any thoughts around this?
I love this. I mean, it's so true. Like, it's really like anywhere that you're interacting with a productivity tool, or you're in, which is, productivity tools. I keep saying that, like Outlook, Teams, PowerPoint, Word, Excel, OneNote, OneDrive, all those good things. And then the Power Platform across your BI, your Power Apps, like we touched on, Power Automate, and then into your ERP, CRM, and then everything that's covered kind of in the infrastructure, the Azure layer, and then Surface with your devices. Like I'm running on a Surface right now. It's really, you have all of this surface area of data that you're interacting with. And so having AI connected on top of that really enables full multimodal capabilities across everything, which is like, that's the cool part, is having all this data that you can add in a, Copilot is just a very simple web call through, there's security behind it, but web call through to OpenAI, and the ChatGPT LLM, the R5 now, which is exciting, and just basically takes your data, puts it in like a super prompt, sends that to OpenAI, and then gets the feedback back. And the amount that you can do with that, it's pretty amazing to see people's eyes go, as wide as they do when we just do a very simple prompt in Copilot, and it goes and reasons through all their emails, their Teams chats, their ERP data. Like, whoa, this is really, really powerful, connected this is. So it's so true. Microsoft really is that like surface area, and all of this interaction that's been going on in your company now is available data to use for AI to reason and perform tasks on your behalf.
Yeah. And the purists in some of us might say, well, that's what ERP systems are for. You should be capturing more of that information in ERP systems. But the reality is, no matter how hard we try, we're never going to get everyone on one platform of Business Central or F&O or any other ERP system for that matter. It's always going to be these emails and outside the system sorts of exchanges. So being able to capture that data, mine it, and make use of it, that's a pretty unique differentiator, I would imagine, that other big tech providers are not able to provide.
Yeah. And there's the really cool technology that's Microsoft loves is Model Context Protocol. And that really enables you to meet your customers where you're at. So a lot of people think, Microsoft and OpenAI, that's, the only way they're ever going to go. But Microsoft's decision to focus around this Model Context Protocol tooling now enables them to be plug and play everywhere. So if you're in any sort of LLM or anything like that, you're now able to plug in. So Microsoft is really realizing, hey, let's build this connector that can plug everything into our apps. And that's only going to supercharge our platform. So it's just such a smart decision.
We're here with Mason talking about the Microsoft ecosystem and how it's approaching the enterprise tech space now and in the future. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 238. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformations. And we're here with Mason Whitaker talking about the Microsoft ecosystem and some of the things that you need to be aware of as you navigate the Microsoft enterprise tech space. Then Michael has a follow-up here again on LinkedIn. Michael says, thank you, Eric. Microsoft has the multiplier effect, so must always be considered first. You guys look like AI here, but yes, better. So how do we prove to Michael and the audience that we are not AI? Copilot did not create this podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got a T here. Do you think Copilot can generate this?
Or without messing up the logo or something?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So let's talk about VARs for a minute, the resellers, the implementers, companies like Bolt Technologies that you're the CEO and founder of. How do I, in this Microsoft space, knowing that it's partner driven, almost to an extreme, I would say it's I don't know of another vendor that is this partner led, I think is the word used, not partner driven, partner led. So you've got partners that are out there finding new applications and new ways of deploying BC or F&O or Power Apps or whatever it is. It's just created this huge, massive proliferation of partners out there. How do you navigate that? Like if I'm a buyer, like, okay, fine, I'm interested in Microsoft, but I need a technical implementer and reseller. I can't just go straight to Microsoft. So how do I navigate these? Is it hundreds of thousands of partners throughout the world? I thought I read once that it was like 600,000 or something like that.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot, but that's when you look at, including just all of the M365 or the AI workplace is what it's called now, tooling. When you look at Dynamics, I think it's less than 100,000. So definitely a smaller piece when you're just looking at ERP and CRM and business applications. But definitely the way to navigate it, Microsoft doesn't put this out there, and there should be more communication around this. But they have a lot of designations and specializations for partners that really denote, if someone actually has met certain standards by Microsoft and qualification criteria, things like that. So that's one way to look at it. And then there's also the industry side of things as well. So when it comes to like the qualifications, you have solution partner designations, and this essentially means that if you have a business application solutions partner designation, that you have performed enough digital transformations that to be noted by Microsoft as a successful partner. You have to meet certain revenue criteria, certain certification statuses. You have to have a certain amount of customers that you're working with, certain amount of licenses, things like that on the product. And then you'll get a designation. So like we're designation in data and AI, modern workplace, business applications, things like that. And then you have the specializations underneath. And this is where Microsoft says, all right, yes, you're a solutions partner, for business applications, but do you actually know this product? And so you have to prove out that you have implemented a product a certain amount of times, that you have enough customer references, and you can get a specialization. So we have a small and mid-size business management specialization here at Volt because we focus on SMB. And then the layer underneath that, which is like kind of the cream of the crop, is called Inner Circle. And this is an exclusive network of partners that is only given, by Microsoft, that they vote on every single year. And I think there's maybe upwards of like 40 or 50 partners in the business application space. And these are kind of that, top tier partners. So you want to look for a lot of these accolades and how long they've been kind of in the network. So this is our 10th consecutive year as an Inner Circle partner. And so you want to just make sure that they've got those qualifications. So Microsoft doesn't really announce that very much. And you may see that just on like SI's web pages and things like that, but you don't know what that means, but that's kind of what that means. And you want a partner who has proven credibility in the product. And then you also want to look at the industry expertise. So are they verticalized and focusing on just some industries, or are they there focusing on just a general function? Like if you go to a partner and they say, we specialize in, maybe less than $5,000 implementations of just finance or something like that, they're kind of going way more horizontal. And if you're looking for something that, hey, maybe I'm an apparel brand and I want an apparel specific solution, they're not going to have that knowledge to be able to tailor the solution for you and build out something that's going to, meet more of your needs from like a fit gap standpoint. So you want a partner that kind of has that industry expertise.
Yeah, that's great advice. And with so many options out there, I mean, it's impossible for Microsoft to have, even though they've got their criteria and guidelines for what a partner needs to do as a minimum requirement, there's still, in my experience, a huge variation of quality and scale and breadth of resources, all that stuff.
And that's what we saw with creating Volt. So we always had at Sunrise a very premier service offering that was more like white glove, something you get with maybe like the big four, but not the price tag of, the big four. Right. And we really focused on just high quality white glove implementation service. And when I was doing that in the enterprise, I realized that, with SMB, there's a proliferation of partners, but not a lot of them that are actually doing it well. There's a lot of skeletons, I'd say, just kind of in the ecosystem. And so saw a big opportunity there with coming in and doing it right. So there's a lot of small partners like mom and pop accounting firms that are like, we'll do your bookkeeping and we'll be your BC partner too. Like we'll maybe buy the license indirect or something like that. And kind of they'll undershoot the complexity of ERP implementation or CRM implementation. And they'll get you the licenses. And then you're like, okay, I've got all this migration and all this integration. And how do I do this? And they're like, well, we'll just do your financials. So there's a graveyard of people that are like that. And so there was that big opportunity for that. And that's kind of what we do differently in the space is SMB, but having that premier kind of more white glove experience.
Yeah, and more than just you and another guy, that just happen to be that they're just going to go do it all for everyone.
This is complex work. And I think it's a lot of people that are SMBs, they don't think ERP is like maybe that complex. They're like, just load my data, and there's a lot to this.
Yeah, it's easy enough to install Microsoft Office. So how could business any more complicated than that? Super interesting. And that's actually, you said it really well. That concept of kind of skeletons in a graveyard of these mom and pops. That's really well said. And that's the fragmentation that I think I'm referring to is, you've got companies like Volt and Sunrise and others that are more scaled and larger. But for every one of you guys, there's, dozens of just these tiny little.
Yeah, it's 90% of the market is really a lot of that because it's, if you're an accounting firm and you can see a way to monetize ERP by just, I'm going to go register as a partner. So there is that kind of downside of having such a large partner ecosystem. There's a lot of bad partners that are out there.
Yeah, for sure. Michael still isn't convinced that this isn't AI because yes, Copilot can generate iced tea bottles.
It's pretty good at it. Yeah, it really is.
It is, but Harry has a point here. I've got moving cars behind me. It's harder to replicate. Although I was thinking it'd be kind of funny to get someone to like fly drones back and forth or something to make it look like it might be AI or get some monkey to climb up the wall.
We should try to recreate this with AI and see actually what the differences are.
See what it actually looks like. And I think it'll be a bit more obvious that it's AI if we were to do that.
Soon it won't be though. Soon it'll look better.
Have you tried that called the Google notebook? I think it's called. What's that?
Banana, the new the new video and image generator.
I haven't tried that one yet, but I've seen the one where you can create like a podcast. It'll just an audio podcast.
I think Notebook LM does it.
Yes, Notebook LM.
Yeah, I haven't tried it, but I have actually seen a couple people at our company. They've made that around Microsoft, and they'll kind of create a podcast, and it's with his own voice too. So it's kind of very unique in that, and it sounds just like him. It really does. So it's pretty incredible.
It is, yeah, and I wouldn't be able to tell, even knowing that it was AI, I couldn't. I was listening for those little nuances that make you think, okay, that makes sense. That's AI.
I had our marketing team actually. They sent me a video and they were like, "Let me know what your thoughts are on approving this." And it was first like a video of me that I remember filming, and then talking about, I think it was GP to BC migration, and all of a sudden it cut to a diagram explanation and explaining how to perform, I think like using the GP to BC tool. And then I was like, it was me talking. It's like, I don't remember saying that. And, but it sounded just like me. I was like, maybe they just got it from another clip. And after about a minute or so, I was like, oh, this is them testing an AI tool just to see if I'll recognize that it wasn't actually me that was saying that. So I went to them and I was like, I'm on to you guys. Like, I know what you did. So it's pretty amazing, especially with you and I, who have a lot of recordings. If you take all that data, you can get pretty good results.
Right. And Michael just will not let it go. He said, "Yep, that's what AI would say." He's still not convinced. He's gonna.
I know he's not sold. I don't know what to do to convince him.
Here's a question from Elidio on LinkedIn. Elidio says, "Is Microsoft ERP flexible to meet the tax needs of any country? Maybe more broadly speaking, just regulatory, just general global requirements." Is that a difference between Business Central and F&O, or how would you answer that?
Yeah, there are more localizations available within finance and supply chain. So that's just kind of generalized, where, like I was saying in the beginning, the 172 different countries that we implemented in, each one kind of had their own nuances when it came to localizations, not just tax, but really a number of others. So there's more in F&O, but there is still a lot within Business Central. So all of your kind of typical countries that we would see just as a US VAR, like Canada and Mexico and UK and throughout South America and Europe and parts of Africa and Asia as well. They do have those localizations, but there's way more within finance and supply chain, where there was, with doing 172 countries, we had one implementation where a requirement of capturing payment at the retail store was to have chickens, and it had to be a payment method that was in there. And so that was in there with finance and supply chain. So that just shows you kind of the breadth that it goes to, kind of with all the different localizations. But Business Central did not have that, or does not have that. So
See, this is why I can never say I've seen it all in the ERP space, because I've never seen that before. I've never seen payment with chickens, but it makes sense. I mean, it's really interesting contrast. Old world meets new world of ERP, and just goes to show the flexibility and the power of ERP systems nowadays.
Yeah, that was I can't remember which country in Africa, but we did the majority of Africa, and there was a lot of crazy localizations, and a lot in South America too. Like a lot more. We kind of in the U.S. market, we're like, oh, sales tax, it's difficult. You have to use Avalara or Vertex, or maintain a custom sort of engine or something. There's a lot more complexity out in the world when it comes to ERP and business applications than just that.
Yeah. And Perry has a good follow-up here too from that question. Perry says there are many country-specific vendors who specialize in localized tax adapters. And then Michael has another good point here that tax codes are also highly documented, drop into AI for verification, reusability, and conflicts.
Yeah, that's a good call. If you can't, Avalara and Vertex do meet a lot of those. There are certain ones, like, so for example, we own a company in China, and they have it's called Wamesoft, and they have a golden tax integration for F&O. It's actually the only one that you'll see out there on AppSource. So there's a lot of partners that have gone and basically pre-built a lot of things. But Microsoft does have a large amount. I can't remember the exact number. It's always increasing with every release. but a large number of localizations that are both in BC and in finance and supply chain. They're really trying to make it more expansive and available for everyone.
Right. So when you look at the future of enterprise tech and AI, automation, all the different stuff happening in the space right now, first of all, part one of this question would be how do you see Microsoft navigating it? Do you have direct knowledge or speculation of what you think Microsoft is going to do in, say, 3 to 5 years? Are they going to keep holding the line or keep heading down the path they're on? Do you see other adjustments or pivots they make, or how do you predict this Microsoft space will adapt to the changing technology landscape here?
Yeah, no, I have both direct and speculation, and some NDA that I can't say from being an inner circle partner. But what I can speak to is that Microsoft is really excited about Model Context Protocol. MCP is really going to change the way that business process is performed in the future. Whereas right now, really that surface area is all ERP and CRM and actually inside of the application. And what we're seeing is that you're going to be able to work with AI tooling to perform a lot more tasks on your behalf and leveraging autonomous agents to be able to do things that you typically would be going into an application and performing. So a large portion of that surface area of work, like we talked about the Microsoft surface area of all the data and security and all the different ecosystem, there's kind of a level above that it's moving to, which is what MCP is enabling. So MCP enabling having like Business Central, and you can plug this into any LLM. So Claude or ChatGPT, whatever model really your preference is. Microsoft is being model agnostic, where they're saying we'll default to OpenAI because we own a big chunk of that, but you can use whatever model you want. And we're going to allow our applications to plug and play into everything. So I can now be in, Claude and say, what's the balances of my customers? Spits you out a list. Okay, send them an aged AR reminder email to these 3. Okay, actually do it this way because I like Nancy and I want to be a little bit friendlier to her. So it's going to change from you going into your ERP and making these sorts of decisions to working in a system that kind of connects into the things that you already do. So that's definitely what I'm really excited about with MCP, and so is Microsoft. Even at a recent conference, we had this executive partner summit that had Microsoft Hearts MCP. It was like the big slide that they had, and that's definitely going to be a big focus for them. And so it's a big focus for partners too, because we've always taken a typical business modeling approach where we say, all right, let's look at your current state, do a whole Visio modeling chart. Here's like your future state where it's now more efficient and more, consolidated, streamlined, and using the new system. And now all of that, there's like a third level to that, which is now how you're using MCP and how your agentic workflow is going to look. So it's something I'm super deep into. Our team is really deep into. We're starting to roll out for our customers. I'm starting to actually make offerings around it. It really is the future, but that's only the next 2 years is what I see with that change. The 2+ is billions, if not trillions, of agents that are running, and when that happens, there's a lot of things that ultimately change. So,
yeah,
more speculation.
Yeah, well, since we're on the thread of speculation here, I'm curious to hear from you on the whole trend of one thing I'm thinking a lot about lately, just as someone who's been in space for a long time too, is that historically ERP software has been sort of the center of gravity, from an architecture and a data and a user perspective. ERP systems, whether it's Business Central or any other ERP system, has always been sort of that center of gravity. All the other apps and the processes sort of revolve around it. It almost seems like the center of gravity is shifting away from ERP. ERP is always going to have a role. It's going to be important, but it almost seems like whether it's agents or MCP, in the case of what Microsoft is doing in particular, it seems like that shift is really shifting that center of gravity, for lack of a better word.
It's the surface area. That's what I keep thinking of. It's like the surface area. It's like with user interface, and Microsoft says this all the time, AI is the new UI. And so that surface area is changing where, all right, if I need to add a customer, I'm not going to go into my ERP or my CRM and go new and walk through all my stuff. where they're going to go is to like an LLM of their choice. And that will even change, especially over the next 2 years, just like how we actually interact with that. But it'll change. So that's where the input is. But the most important thing is still going to be the heart of the business, which is ERP, CRM, and these engines that are requiring, validation and transactional integrity and having to be reliable. I used to get obsessed with this idea of, real-time code generation kind of live in front of you. Like when I first saw LLMs do this, I was just like, this is the future. We're just going to automatically generate apps on the fly and say, I need this thing, generates it. I'm going to perform a task. And then it's going to basically, remove the code and deprecate the code. And it'll only exist and be persistent at that runtime. But then when I saw this, this idea, and I actually started, really focusing and seeing how I could leverage this, realized how, absolutely critical it is to have a core set of business logic and transactional integrity and a database that's logical and relational, how critical that is. You can't just do a power apps for everything. You got to have a heart for your business. So while the surface area is changing and is really, we're going to see it really, really change over the next year, just way with MCP, just way more into LLMs. That is going to be really exciting because the person's business process will change, but that ERP and that heart of the business and CRM, those are going to be even more important. So that's the way that Microsoft sees it as well. Like they're seeing that this is the golden era of Dynamics 365 because these components are going to become even more critically important, even as that surface area changes. So while it may be less users' eyeballs, on the applications, the importance actually is going to go through the roof. It'll kind of be like the engine underneath the hood. You don't always have to open the hood, but you've got to have an engine. So
yeah, I've never even opened the hood of my car to see if there's an engine there, but I assume there is one. But
yeah, exactly. And that's where we're excited just as the partner network because we'll be those mechanics. Like there's going to be a lot of last mile problems of how do we get this, tweaked and in there or context for my business? And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for partners with that.
Right. Yeah. And Darian has an interesting follow-up to that. Darian on LinkedIn says, given how quickly Microsoft is baking in Copilot and Power Platform tools, do you think smaller partners can even keep up? Or is the AI-driven future of ERP going to widen the gap between premier partners like Volt and the mom and pop graveyard of implementers that you were talking about before?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is going to be a gap, but it's going to be a gap just like you see in technology always. If someone is still focusing on Great Plains, the product is end of life. That you have to have a new offering. And so just as we've always seen in technology, I've seen it firsthand a lot where I become an expert in something and then, hey, there's something new. And then now that thing is deprecated. You have to be keeping up with the curve and staying current on these things. There will be a gap between that. And I think the pace that gap is created has accelerated a bit. But I definitely think it's nothing new. It's something we've kind of always seen with just the rate of technological advancement.
And it'll continue to evolve and look a lot different in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, but it's the same sort of dynamic plan.
Got to stay current. I definitely think there's a lot of value that you can unlock just like for yourself as a partner if you really do focus on how can I make these tools work for my customer, and like trying to build a methodology around the implementation of it, doing the framework of how you would do continuous improvement for it and things like that.
Yeah. It seems like it would be harder to, not harder, but it seems like one thing you'd want to do to vet potential partners in the Microsoft space or to make sure that they don't know just one system, like whether it's an obsolete product like Great Plains or even Business Central. In your case, you want someone that knows Business Central, they know Power Apps, they know Copilot, they know how this all ties together. Like you said, you need a mechanic that can piece this all together, not just a specialist that knows one tiny piece of it, because that's not the way that's not Microsoft's value, really. It's their values in the broader surface area that you're talking about.
Yeah, you want to ask your partner, about those things outside of just the single swim lane that they're talking to you about, because you kind of have to have that context. What we've seen a lot in the SMB graveyard, since we're using the term, I'll keep kind of honing in on it, is that a lot of partners will just have really over customized GP or SL or NAV to do things that maybe like ISV solutions that were available at the time just are able to do, and they're kind of known in the market for doing that. And so, or like a Power Platform tool that's just way, way easier than, you know, building out this whole customization around something. And so that's where, you know, a partner, normally a smaller partner, has kind of tunnel vision on, this is how the only way that I know how to do things. So I'm going to put everything kind of into this box. And you do want a partner who's looking ahead at the things that are coming and saying, hey, maybe we could do this in this way now, but here's the way that we're going to actually do it, you know, when this thing is released. Or, you know, hey, here's ISV offerings or Power Platform things that we could be doing instead of this. We always do an options analysis with our customers to say, like, here's how we could do it maybe direct. Here's how you do it with an ISV. Here's how you do it with like Power Platform, low, no code. And just, you know, here's the trade-offs, you know, all of those things. You really want a partner who's thinking about that for you and not just thinking, oh yeah, the only thing I know is AL code, so I'm just going to keep doing it. Which AL is the programming language for Business Central.
Right. Got it. So what's your parting advice to a CIO, IT director, project manager, someone who's sitting here, maybe their head's spinning a little bit. There's a lot here. We've talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of different options, a lot of different technologies that Microsoft is pursuing in the enterprise space and creating a complete solution. What single piece of advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, trying to figure out how to chart that course and define that strategy that makes the most sense for them?
Yeah, as a CIO, I'd say first thing that I'd like to educate on is you're not behind. This is normal. Like just because you see we're talking about MCP and all the things that AI is doing with business process, you know, you are not behind. You're actually right where everyone else is at in the market. You know, this is coming from the absolute bleeding edge in the forefront of things. You know, so first, kind of take a deep breath there. Second thing is that you need to think of this change in levels. And you want to make sure you are leveling up your entire organization and even your technology, your platform. And that first level is, you know, thinking of it as productivity gains. So this is the basics. This is, hey, how do I leverage Copilot to like look through my email? Okay, so in order to do that, I need to have my data right. I need to have Outlook for one. You know, I need to have security roles. This is kind of just the basics, if you will, kind of, you know, blocking and tackling when it comes to your foundation. So you need to be like getting everything ready from just like the foundational layer, infrastructure, your general things, just to enable the basics of literally like turning on a tool like Copilot or enabling your organization to turn on ChatGPT. You know, like most people have this stuff blocked, and that's because CIOs are like, the plumbing is not right. Everything will explode if we turn this on. You have to get that plumbing right. And that's level one. Level two is starting to look at this from a business process transformation. So where can I take my existing processes that I have pretty well defined, maybe in SOPs or in like process models, and where can I start looking at those to say, where can I actually incorporate, you know, these productivity gains, these tools into these processes? So thinking about, hey, rather than having, you know, Susie search through her email for 4 hours for, you know, a couple files, maybe we can build into the process that there's a Copilot agent that does that instead. And now it saves her, you know, like a couple hours a day. So looking at those areas, that's kind of the level two. And you have to have level one right before you can go to level two. And level three, which, you know, there's very few organizations who are even here yet, but it's starting to look at things from an autonomous perspective. So rather than, all right, human triggers Copilot, and then now Copilot performs action, now there's human in the loop, and then we can perform our business process as usual. Now looking at entire workflows and saying, okay, well, what's a trigger for this that then I can have Copilot run on autonomously and perform actions on my behalf? And starting to look at that really, you know, that business process model and saying, now, how can Copilot or an AI agent do all of this? And that's that full autonomous future where we're going to see that there's, you know, millions, billions, you know, trillions in the long distance future of these agents kind of running. But you have to think of it in levels. It's level one, get the platform, the foundation, the data security, and be able just to hit that, you know, configure button or that provision button on like Copilot or ChatGPT, and you feel secure about it. Level two is looking at it from just inserting it into business process. and where can you provide value still with a lot of human in the loop. And then level 3 is, all right, let's actually try to crack the egg, which is autonomous agents.
Very cool. It's almost like a mini maturity model, looking at kind of where you are now and where you want to get. And what I like about the way you're describing all this, by the way, and one thing that I think our industry forgets is that you need a partner that is on the forefront of technological advance, but knows how to come back to where you are, because it doesn't do any good if you know all the stuff you've been talking about on this podcast, but yet you don't know how to bring it back to where the client is today.
100%. Yeah, it is.
Take a deep breath. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's crazy to see the amount of, when we talk about AI, or someone comes to me talking about AI and they're like, all right, so let's look at this. And here's my paper-driven process. So I get a Post-it note from Nancy in AR. And then I go and it's like, all right, so before we talk AI, let's kind of get down to this level 1 and let's go through the process, get the data right, security right, the process right, and then look to see, hey, are we even able to turn on like a Copilot or a ChatGPT or something?
Yeah, not if you're using sticky notes.
Yeah,
probably not going to work as well as it could.
It's not going to know what to reason over. So,
right. Okay. Well, thank you, Mason. That was a great conversation. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. And again, if you'd like to learn more about the Microsoft enterprise technology space and just how Microsoft might fit into your overall digital strategy and plans, and also how to make your Microsoft D365 implementation more successful, be sure to download our guide to successful Microsoft D365 implementations. You can find that for free on our website by scanning the QR code right on the screen in front of you, or you can go to the links below. So we had a great conversation with Mason. We're going to debrief on that here in just a minute, and we're also going to get into an ERP failure case study involving Microsoft D365. We've got a lot more to cover still in this episode, so be sure to stick around, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 238. This is Eric Kimberling with Darian Chwialkowski. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital strategy, people, process, and technology. And we just had Mason Whitaker on the show talking about the Microsoft ecosystem in particular. What were some of your thoughts and questions and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I love when we can get somebody who's so focused in on one vendor, for example, like this, Microsoft, and we can learn a lot more about that ecosystem. To start, though, on things I found interesting, one thing AI specifically that you guys talked to was the point about AI polish credibility and how anyone really can look senior now, which makes references for people more important than ever. With this, Eric, how do we confirm the consultants we meet in sales are the ones that will get in delivery, or what should businesses be asking to consultants to get that answer?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you have to recognize the leverage and the influence you have over how a partner staffs the project. So if you bring on a technical partner, a technical implementation partner, or any consulting firm for that matter, you really like the salesperson you're dealing with, but then you have no idea who you're actually getting. A couple of things you may want to do is, first of all, make sure you ask to talk to the team. You know, you're selling me a team, you're selling me a number of billable hours, you're selling me an end result, but help me meet the team and understand and feel comfortable with the team. So that's step one, is just make sure you ask that as part of your evaluation process, is show me the team, not the salespeople that talk a good talk, but the ones that can actually do the work. And so that's step one. Step two would be make sure you have a clause in your agreements that give you the flexibility or the authority to approve and or disapprove or eliminate anyone on the project that you don't like. So if the tech provider is providing a resource and it doesn't seem to be adding value, or it's not a good cultural fit, whatever the case may be, then make sure you have the control and authority to be able to remove that or replace that resource. Now, you do have to be careful because no one's perfect. And we've had clients that really cycle through some of these technical resources because they aren't perfect or they don't have the answers to everything. And so there's a slippery slope you've got to be careful of there, because no one person is going to have all the answers and be perfect. And if you micromanage that process too much, that can actually end up biting you going forward. But there's no reason why you shouldn't have a say or have involvement in who touches your project and who makes some of these major decisions and executes on these major things that are going to affect your business for years to come. And so you have to treat those decisions accordingly. And if something's not working, make sure you have the flexibility and the authority to make a change.
For sure. And another point that I want to kind of change into would be the Copilot. When you guys were talking about Copilot adoption and how it's really helped with ROI post go live. One example you guys said was the invoice going from 4 hours to 5 minutes. And it really showed how Copilot or different AI tools can really help in that post go live phase. Eric, in your opinion, what functional areas deliver fastest when Copilot payback after finance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the business, but I would say supply chain is oftentimes the next biggest one, because it can do so much to tie together end-to-end supply chain from planning and inventory management all the way down to production and job scheduling and warehouse management, and certainly transportation and logistics. So I think there's a lot there to uncover in terms of business value. Microsoft CRM is, we didn't talk a lot about that with Mason. I don't recall if we talked about Microsoft CRM at all, but that is a very solid solution that a lot of sales-driven organizations will pursue, as a Microsoft CRM. So that can be a way to drive more top-line revenue growth for those distribution-focused companies or more sales-driven organizations. So it could be Microsoft CRM if you're more focused on the sales and distribution side of things.
For sure, that makes sense. And to go off of Copilot, I think you guys used the phrase AI is the new UI, and how ERP won't necessarily disappear, but the way we interact with it right now is changing really fast. So with this, how soon should mid-market plan for agentic workflows in their business?
I think they should start planning now. I mean, we have two or three clients right now where we're, as we speak, working through defining their future state processes to leverage agentic AI. And in each of these cases, by the way, they're not doing it as part of a broader ERP implementation. They're doing it as just a standalone AI initiative, leveraging their legacy systems and data to now put agentic AI in place. And it's a way to get, lower lower cost, lower risk sorts of solutions in place with potentially higher value. It's not easy, but in some cases it just makes more sense for these clients to leverage agentic AI, knowing that they've got decent legacy systems that still work. The data is pretty decent. So rather than getting distracted by a big, massive ERP overhaul, they're saying, hey, let's put agentic AI in place now. So we're already seeing clients do it. We have a handful that are doing it right now as we speak. And I suspect that in a year or two, we're going to see a lot of clients doing it, whether it's part of a broader digital transformation or ERP project or as a standalone or some hybrid combination of both. I think you're just going to see a lot of it here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, I think there was some framing of Microsoft's ecosystem as surface area and how it's a unique multiplier, but also could be a lock-in risk. With that, Eric, is there or what are the exit strategies to keep leverage with Microsoft in particular?
Vendor lock is something that we rail on a lot. The companies that get stuck with a certain vendor. One thing about Microsoft, I'll say, that you have to look at or consider is that they aren't, even if you do get locked into becoming a Microsoft shop, let's just say, which a lot of companies already are. A lot of companies are already Microsoft shops. They're already all in on Microsoft, and everything they use is sort of a Microsoft first approach. The only reason that I'm not as critical of vendor lock when it comes to Microsoft is simply because they provide so many different options and so much flexibility, and they don't necessarily do it from a top down, overplaying their hand and bullying their vendor or bullying their customer perspective. Some tech providers, I think, do. Like SAP, I think, is the opposite. They take more of a top down. They want you to become an SAP shop because of that lack of flexibility. And it's typically focused on a single platform or single product like S4HANA as the core. Whereas Microsoft, they don't really care if you implement D365 or if you're focused on Copilot or Microsoft Office and Power Apps, Power BI, all that stuff. There's a lot of different it's just a lot more fragmented. So it's even if you are locked into becoming a Microsoft shop, you still have so many options within that Microsoft community. We talked about how there's hundreds of thousands of Microsoft resellers, for example, and a lot of those hundreds of thousands of Microsoft VARs throughout the world are actually ISV providers as well. So they provide some sort of technical solution built on the Microsoft platform. So it's almost like even in the world of Microsoft, there's so much competition and so much fragmentation that it doesn't feel the same or doesn't have the same negative impact in many cases as if someone were to get locked into an SAP or an Oracle sort of situation like that. So I'm not saying it's perfect and don't worry about it, but it's just a little bit different. And I think that is, it's part of the effectiveness of what the strategy is that Microsoft is pursuing, in my opinion.
For sure. Yeah, definitely super interesting and just a good conversation overall. I feel like we dived into a lot of different parts of Microsoft as a whole. So that was great.
Yeah, it's a super fascinating company. Continues to be after all these years of Microsoft being around and being a household name. It's interesting to see how they're evolving and continuing to evolve and drive forward some of these innovations. So good stuff there. Well, one thing that we talked about, so we just had Mason Whitaker on the show. We talked about some of the things that you need to be aware of as you navigate the Microsoft ecosystem. We talked about some of the different products in the space and how to find the right partners and the right technology stack within the Microsoft space. But what we want to do now is shift gears and talk more from a end customer perspective, someone who tried to implement Microsoft D365 and failed. And what we'll see in this case study is that they didn't fail largely because of the technology they chose. In this case, Microsoft, they failed due to other things. And so the question is, well, what are those other things? And what can we learn and take away from this? Whether we're implementing D365 or whether we're implementing any non-Microsoft product, any ERP system, CRM, human capital management, AI, whatever it is, how can we avoid some of these same challenges that Metcash ran into? And Metcash is a retailer out of Australia. They recently had a pretty significant failure there. So we're going to play you this case study and we'll come back and debrief and talk about some of the takeaways there.
They spent nearly $300 million on the implementation. They had planned to be live on the new software by 2023, but as of 2023, they had only implemented a third-party subset of their entire ERP implementation. So the company was implementing a well-known and proven ERP system, and it was leveraging the implementation assistance from both KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So why did this project not succeed? That's what I'm going to talk about throughout the rest of this video. So most of the information I'm going to discuss with you here in today's video is based on public record. It's information that's been published by journalists and others that have interviewed employees and looked at some of the findings from the failed implementation. However, stay tuned until the end of the video because I'm also going to share with you some insights from conversations I had directly with Metcash employees before they started the implementation and right as they were getting started on their implementation, just to give some insights as to how the project team might have been thinking as they entered the transformation. One of the first challenges that the Metcash team faced was that they underestimated the complexity of moving to a standardized operating model. In other words, this was a diversified retailer that had 3 different primary retail operations that they're running with very different ways of operating, very different systems they're running on, and the goal was to move towards a single way of operating on a single platform. Nothing wrong with this. A lot of organizations do this every day, but getting there was a lot more difficult than this organization had planned on or anticipated. So that was one of the biggest problems, and one of the first problems that the company faced was that moving towards a global standardized set of processes wasn't nearly as easy as they thought it would be. One of the main takeaways from this point is for a diversified conglomerate or any sort of diversified business, it's going to be very important to define your standard business processes early in the project before you start implementing technology. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of trouble throughout the implementation, and I suspect that's what happened here with Metcash, is that they didn't take the time up front to define their business processes and agree on what those business processes might be. Now, the other question that I have in this case is whether or not the common business process operating model was the right answer for this organization. They had 3 very distinctly different businesses that they're running, and it just simply may not have been realistic to move everyone onto the common operating platform. Even if they're using the same software, there were other ways that they could have had some flexibility or some sort of decentralization that allowed each business unit to operate independently of one another. But having said all of that, this is something that the project team did not seem well prepared for or aligned on how to handle in the implementation. Another challenge that Metcash faced is that the project team felt as though they were sold an unrealistic vision for the project. In other words, Microsoft sold them a vision or a dream of what Dynamics D365 could do for their organization, and they were oversold on the capabilities of what Microsoft Dynamics 365 could do. More specifically, it was positioned and sold to them as a plug-and-play, highly integrated, highly interoperable sort of solution that could easily plug and play to other solutions. And so it sounds as though the Metcash team was really enamored by this idea of a simple plug-and-play solution, something that can be very easy to deploy because it's a Microsoft product and everyone's familiar with Microsoft. And as a result, they set unrealistic expectations for the project internally within Metcash. And as I've discussed in other videos on my YouTube channel, unrealistic expectations is one of the primary root causes of why transformations fail. If you have unrealistic expectations like Metcash did, you're going to end up having 2 things happen. First, an organization is going to spend more time and money than they expect. They're going to go over budget, the timeline is going to slip early on, and those are big challenges that organizations face. And secondly, what happens is organizations with unrealistic expectations end up making bad decisions later because they're trying to force fit their implementation into an unrealistic plan and budget. So those are 2 of the problems with having these unrealistic expectations, and that certainly sounds like something that haunted the Metcash project and its team from the start. Another lesson from the Metcash ERP implementation failure is that the project team was all in on Microsoft from the very start. Come hell or high water, the organization was going to use Microsoft tools for every nook and cranny of their business. Every need they had during the implementation was going to involve a Microsoft product, whether or not it was the right fit for them or not. And that's something that it can be a big challenge for a lot of organizations that think that by sticking with one vendor, they're going to solve all of their problems with that one solution, and that's just not the case. Now, one of the reasons why the Metcash team seemed to have a bias toward Microsoft was that they conducted a comparison of SAP versus Microsoft, and they ultimately landed on Microsoft because one small part of their company had been using Microsoft Dynamics 365 allegedly successfully. And so there's an internal bias towards Microsoft, thinking that if Microsoft could work for this one small part of their business, then surely it must be able to work for the rest of their business. And whether or not Microsoft is the right fit, I couldn't tell you because I haven't worked with this client directly, But what I can tell you is that oftentimes organizations put the blinders on and they think overly highly or overly optimistically of a certain software vendor. And as it turns out, implementing Microsoft D365 at one small location within Metcash is very different than rolling out Microsoft D365 across the entire diversified business. Those are two very different scenarios and two very different models. So regardless of these potential misfits between what the needs were of the various business units and what the product and the tool set could do on the technology side, the Metcash team was very focused on implementing Microsoft and Microsoft-related tools, no matter what the case may be. Now, the Metcash team also appeared to have a lack of project governance on the implementation. And it wasn't just the project management type of governance I'm talking about here. It's also just the way the project was structured and the reporting relationship of the project. The project team did not report up to the CEO originally. It reported up to one of the leaders within one of the business units. So it didn't even report up to the group level. It was kind of buried within the organization within one of the three business units that was within Metcash. And that begs the question of why would you take a global project that's supposed to affect the entire operations, why would you push that down into one business unit of an organization? That I couldn't tell you, but it's generally not a good idea. The second thing is you have to ask yourself, if this is an important transformation and it's truly going to transform a business, why wouldn't that project report up to the executive team, if not the CEO of the organization? Now, this is a correction that Metcash made later in the project, and I'll actually get to that later in this video, what Metcash did to pivot and change gears on this. But early in the project, they had the project reporting to a lower level within the organization. In addition to the reporting relationship, the project itself also appeared to run in parallel with the rest of the business. In other words, business operations weren't heavily involved in the project. It was sort of expected to be an IT upgrade that was happening in parallel with the business rather than getting the business engaged in the project. And that was a challenge from what the post-mortem report showed that Metcash did after the project failed and they brought in a new CEO. That report showed that the project didn't have the proper governance and controls in place from that perspective as well. At the peak of the original phase of the project, Metcash had over 200 consultants from KPMG supporting the project. And you think, okay, if I've got 200 consultants from one of the world's leading consultancies and system integrators, what's the worst that could happen? Well, it turns out these 200 consultants weren't really being deployed effectively. On top of that, you also had PwC that was also acting as the assurance partner, the one that was sort of double-checking the work of KPMG. But despite having two of the world's leading and best-known consulting firms involved in this project, the project still failed. And when the new CEO came in partway through this project, after it had already gone off the rails, one of the first things he did was say, we're pausing this run rate and we're going to slow down the project. Because having 200 consultants on a project doesn't necessarily mean you're going to finish the project faster. Projects like these take a certain amount of time regardless of how many bodies you throw at it. The only person that's benefiting from throwing more bodies at a project is typically going to be the technical integrator or the technical consultant. In this case, KPMG and PwC. So for that reason, I commend the new CEO for saying, hey, we're going to slow down this project, slow down the run rate and stop bleeding cash and stop trying to rush a project that can't be rushed. And so that was one of the big adjustments that he made when he came in, was to change that. The other thing he did is he also took control of the project by having the project team report up to the CEO rather than burying it within one of the business units of the organization. He also opted to bring a lot of the competencies in-house, a lot of the program management and the technical knowledge and the competencies. He brought that in-house, which I think is a very smart move, and more organizations should do that. Rather than hiring 200 consultants to support you, why not build the competencies in-house so that when those consultants go away, you've got that competency to sustain the project and to continue improving the technology and adapting to new technologies along the way, rather than creating that sort of learned helplessness that comes along with completely outsourcing a project to a technical implementation partner. So here's where things get really interesting, in that I had the privilege of actually interviewing some of the Metcash team members several years ago. I was in Australia and had a chance to meet with their team and learn a little bit more about their project well before any of these problems transpired. So I have some unique perspectives from talking to them about what actually happened and what was going through their minds at the time that the project started. And one of the really interesting things I found is in my notes, I actually wrote down a quote where someone said in the team that I met with that they were being sold a dream. And the reason I bring this up and the reason I think this is so telling is because in the post-mortem report, in the reports that have come out publicly since the failure, they sort of look back and say, in hindsight, they were sold a dream. And Metcash employees actually used those exact same words to describe the upcoming project to me 5 years ago when they first started the project. So it seemed to me as though they knew from the start they were being sold a dream, yet they continued to barrel forward with the project. Now, how they got from being sold a dream to where the project ended up today, I can tell you some of the things I know from the surface and from public information, but that I found to be a really interesting finding from my discussions with them several years ago. The other interesting thing I found from my discussions with them years ago was that they had indicated that they had already standardized their business processes, or at the very least they had defined what their standard business processes were going to be. But when you look at the postmortem and some of the publications that have written about this failure in recent months, you see that they say that they didn't standardize and they couldn't standardize. So whether they just didn't go deep enough or didn't fully understand what those standardizations entailed, I couldn't tell you. But I do know that from the start they were thinking about standardization and they thought they had defined a standard set of business processes prior to starting the implementation. And then finally, in my conversations with Metcash several years ago, they had commented on the part of the organization that had already implemented D365. And if you recall from earlier in this video, I described how there was a bias towards Microsoft because they had successfully deployed D365 at one of their New Zealand operations. And in my notes from my conversation several years ago, I had noted that they said that that D365 implementation was troubled. So in other words, that D365 implementation did not go well several years ago at that one small location within Metcash. But yet several years later, people look back and say that implementation went well, and that's why we picked D365. So I don't know if this is an issue of organizational memory getting distorted or leadership turnover, project team turnover, and the facts tend to get distorted or whatever the case may be. But I found that to be very interesting in that there actually were problems, there were red flags that may have been overlooked from the very beginning. So these are just a few of the tips and the lessons that I take away from some of the public information that's been published about this implementation failure, and hopefully this has provided some interesting guidance and lessons to help you avoid some of the same problems that Metcash face.
So that was a video from my YouTube channel where I talk about the case study of Metcash and their failed Microsoft D365 implementation. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, super interesting conversation. I think, first of all, just like the red flags that were ignored, like you said, interesting to learn about, especially how they were being almost like sold a dream, yet leadership pushed forward anyway without confirming that that dream was like real. But I think the biggest lesson overall was that failed ERP projects don't usually come from just technology. And I think that's something that you say on this podcast a lot. They come from a lot of people, governance, expectations, and the lack of maybe courage to challenge bad assumptions early on in a project. So taking all those lessons, you mentioned unrealistic expectations, obviously. How do you coach executives to recognize when they're being oversold before it's too late to avoid something like this?
Well, I think the first thing is just to unpack the assumptions and the plan and just the overall details of the proposed technology vendor provider perspective or from their plan, because oftentimes they're the ones that come to the table with an incomplete plan. And when you talk through it with an executive team, they on the surface think it looks fine. So the key is to ask questions around some of the assumptions in the statement of work or in the proposed approach from the technical vendor, and really helping the clients or the executive team understand where the gaps are. What about data migration? What about training we're going to train the trainer with your technology provider, for example, but who's going to actually go train all the mass number of end users that need to be trained? Usually that's just a single line item in a set of longer assumptions that are in a proposal, but that one line item, that one bulleted assumption in a statement of work can cause havoc. It can wreak havoc on your project. It can cause massive overruns in terms of time and cost, along with the chaos that goes along with it. So you have to make sure that you walk through and understand from an objective third party what's there, what's missing, what assumptions are unrealistic, and how can we get this to be more right-sized with reality? Because more often than not, these technology providers can implement technology a lot faster than the organization can adjust to the technology operationally and organizationally. And so we've got to find a way to mitigate or to reconcile that difference between how fast we can deploy technology versus how fast we change. And those all come through questions that you ask your executive team. And that's a big part of the executive alignment and strategy setting that I personally am still involved with a lot of our clients.
For sure. And lastly, looking back, do you think that Metcash's failure was inevitable given how the project was framed? Or do you think it could have been saved with stronger governance from the start?
I think it could have been saved at some point along the way, especially if that governance was in place early on. The whole thing could have been avoided, in my opinion, if you had the right governance and the right strategy and plan and approach. But even then, even if you started off on the wrong foot and you get a few months in or halfway through the project and realize things are off track, I just don't fully understand how companies throughout the world continue to just power through. They power ahead and just finish it up, rather than reflecting and saying, wait a minute, are we doing this the right way? Maybe there's something we're doing here that's creating a lot of these problems. And rather than just trying to get it over with because it's so painful, maybe we should look at where the pain's coming from, what we could do to mitigate that risk. So that'd be my opinion, or my advice is just don't assume that's just how it has to be, because most of these projects fail. Most of them fail because the companies let them fail. It's not because they're destined or doomed to fail. It's because of the decisions that oftentimes are made by the implementing organization itself.
Yeah, definitely. Super interesting to talk and learn about all those different failures for sure. I always love when you do the little case studies on those on YouTube for sure.
Yeah, and it also makes it real. When it's a company, if you're in the Australian region or an area where there's Metcash there, I mean, it just becomes a little bit more real when it's a company you work with or you shop at, or a government entity that's servicing clients or citizens, I should say, or a candy manufacturer that makes candy you enjoy or your kids enjoy. I mean, anytime you can personalize it and see how, positive and negative results from an ERP implementation can affect everyday life, I think that's something that's super helpful. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. We look forward to the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. In the meantime, just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes. You can also subscribe to the podcast at that same website on whichever platform you prefer. So check it out at transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you'd like to collaborate with us on this podcast or other content that's produced by Major Tom Productions, feel free to reach out to us. We've included our contact information below. And as always, if you need help with your Microsoft roadmap and or your non-Microsoft roadmap, if you're watching here and you're not sold on Microsoft, you're not necessarily going down a Microsoft only path, we're tech agnostic, we're independent, we're not affiliated with Microsoft or any other software vendors, and we can help you with your digital transformation journey. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to chat with you about how our team can help. So hope this is all helpful to you. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.